Hey guys, so I've just played a rapid game, it's a 15-minute game, against a player rated 1063. If you've been catching up with my recent videos, I did one on how to improve your chess rating, and one of the things that I said in there was advising people to play against players who are at least your standard, if not slightly better, because that's how you will play your best chess. It can be really, really tricky to play against weaker players, not least because it lulls you into a false sense of security. And they can play weird moves that you don't expect, so it can be really challenging in many ways. So anyway, here's the game. Let's go through it. E4 and now D5, the Scandinavian. So the correct move here is to capture the pawn. And normally I would expect queen recaptures, and then I would develop my knight to c3, kicking the queen away, winning a tempo. And that normally leads to a fairly comfortable opening. But my opponent plays the modern with knight to f6. So in this situation, you don't try and protect that pawn. It's pretty futile. You're much better off just going back to basics and focusing on development, control of the center, etc. That pawn is a goner. So knight captures. I develop my my kingside knight. Clearly I don't want to develop this knight, because if knight captures, the only piece I've got to recapture with is my pawn on b2, and that would leave me with doubled and isolated pawns. Not a good start to the game. So out comes the king's knight, and now black plays g6, preparing by the look of things to fianchetto on the king side, and probably castle on the king side. So I bring out my bishop. I'm getting ready. I've got ideas of castling on the king side. And now black's other knight comes out. So he's looking at this pawn here on d4. Right now it's okay because I've got two pieces defending that pawn. So I go ahead and castle, and now the bishop comes out with a pin. And here is a potential tactical quagmire that I actually missed. And this is the danger. If a player rated 1000 should, is capable of calculating something like this, and when you're playing somebody who's rated like 350 points lower than you, it can be a problem. If you don't put in the same effort, and if you think that you're just going to walk a game. So what's the danger here? Well, clearly the knight's pinned against the queen, right? Now my queen is actually what we call in chess tactic, it is an overworked defender. So the queen is the only piece defending the d4 pawn, and really the only good piece defending the knight on f3. Yes, the g2 pawn is also defending that knight, but I really do not want to be forced to capture with a g2 pawn, opening up a semi-open file towards my king, right? So there are options here. So let's say, for example, black were to capture. It's not black's go, but if black were to capture that knight and I recapture with a queen, then bishop takes knight, the queen's out of the way, and I would be forced to recapture with the g2 pawn. Not very nice at all, right? Likewise, if bishop captures knight and I recapture with the queen, then potentially we've got knight takes, also kicking the queen. However, if it goes that way round, or in fact either way round it goes, so let's say knight takes, queen takes, I've then got two pieces looking at this knight, which is only defended once. Likewise, if bishop takes, queen takes, I've got the queen and the bishop looking at that knight also. So I think the more challenging and difficult one would be if knight takes, queen takes, and then bishop goes ahead and captures on f3 anyway. I might have, so I'm going to have my queen there on d4, I'm going to have a bishop that's just captured my knight there. What do? Do I go ahead and, no, in fact I can't, because then that bishop is then going to be the second defender of that knight. So I've actually made a problem for myself right, in the first few moves. So to defend that, I ought to add another defender to this knight, really, or at least another defender to that pawn. So I think c3 wouldn't have been a bad idea here. Alternatively, bishop to e3, both of them defending that vulnerability. In the end, that didn't happen. I didn't figure it out that closely, and that's the danger. So I decided to develop my dark squared bishop, and also to a square where it could be kicked away quite easily as well. Fortunately, black had not calculated what I had not calculated, and decided to go ahead with his original idea of the fianchetto of the bishop. Now at this point, still, I should have played c3. Instead, I decided to kick the bishop. Now, this is kind of okay, because it's likely to prompt bishop takes knight, which is alright for me, because if bishop takes knight and queen takes and knight takes, I get the knight. So I get to be a piece up, right? However, if knight takes had been first and then queen takes, I'd have still had that problem of bishop takes with no other defender other than the g-pawn. So there we go. Fortunately, and I can count my lucky stars here, black decided to go ahead with the exchange, and I recapture with the queen. And now, yes, the knight comes in and grabs the free pawn, but what black has missed here is that there are two attackers now on his knight, and so even though this capture now comes with an attack on the queen, it's not enough. So I grab the knight, and I'm actually 2 pawns up, and I'm also threatening f7 now as well. There is also another danger here, which I hadn't figured out and I hadn't calculated, which is, for example, queen takes, and then bishop takes, and then knight takes c2, and look, I've got a landlocked rook that cannot escape, so I would lose my material advantage straight away. And that's assuming that I can recapture the knight without losing any more material. Fortunately, my opponent doesn't spot that and plays his knight back to safety. I decide to push c3, which has the benefit of preventing this knight. So I've now figured out what that danger was, and this move is a prophylactic move. It stops the knight coming back to d4 and then threatening my rook on c2. It's worth noting that he can't come around this way. He can't come to there and there because he can get captured by the pawn, but there's nothing defending c2. Okay, so far so good. Black pushes h6 to try and kick my bishop away. I decide just to retreat because I figure that g5 is only going to weaken black further. Black does play g5, and my bishop's fine. It comes back to g3, no worries. Now c6 is pushed to kick the queen, or ask the question of the queen, and I decide, look, I'm up on material. I'm 2 points up, so I've got an extra bishop, whereas black's got an extra pawn. So I decide to go ahead with the exchange of queens. Rook takes, and now bishop takes the knight, because I know that the only way to recapture is with the f-pawn, which is what black does. And now black is in a bit of a problem. He's got 3 pawn islands. He's got these doubled and isolated pawns on the e-file. One of his rooks has already moved, so there's no way he can castle queenside, and castling kingside is not looking all that appealing. Plus, his remaining bishop is now looking at 2 dark squared pawns there, so I'm starting to feel a bit more comfortable. I've developed my knight to a3, so my knight wants to come round into the game somehow, maybe attack these pawns. And now black plays e5, which I think is a slightly loose move. I mean, it's defended by that bishop, but by the same token, it's keeping that bishop out of the game. That bishop's now only got 2 squares it can move to. And so I bring my knight in, and obviously I Oh no, I've got 2 attackers now because I've got my own dark square bishop. b5 kicks the knight. That's not a problem. Just capture. Bishop captures, and now I'm 3 points up because I've just grabbed another pawn. Black brings his rook across, and I decide to bring my rook to d1 on the open file to try and dominate the open file. It would be great if black wants to exchange on there. Black doesn't exchange, he moves his king. I move my bishop back to a nice safe place where it's protected by this pawn. And now a6 is played. I bring my other rook across, so I'm now targeting this lonely e-pawn. That is my main idea right now. Here, black pushes the pawn. I bring my bishop in to attack the rook. Rook moves, and we swap off rooks. So now black's still got 3 pawn islands, which is less than ideal. And I'm a bishop up, a whole piece. Bring my bishop back to its comfortable place. King moves again, but moves into the line of a skewer. So pretty much the end of the game. The king is forced to move because it's in check, and next move I can grab the rook. King takes, and now my rook can just start dominating the board. And the beauty of having a rook on the board when your opponent's really only got a king is now that I've got this king right now trapped in there. I mean, yes, it's possible for the king to come and attack the rook, but it's now an idea for me to corral the king in a corner of the board while my king then comes out, which is what you want to do in the end game. Pawn's pushed, doesn't matter, I just grab it with a rook, and now the rook is defended. So now the king is stuck in this quarter of the board, and all I need to do now is just to advance my king and make sure that I don't do anything stupid with the pawns. Keep advancing the king, moves to there, I play g4 with check, and now I just come across, there's no way the king can save this pawn, so I grab the pawn, and now I grab the other pawn, and now it's just a case of finishing off the end game without stalemating. Okay, so the rook comes there, now the king is safe in just this portion of the board again, right? Because it can't go onto any of these squares, and it can't attack the rook because the rook's defended by my king. So my pawns have a free path to the other side, but I decided it would be more fun actually to practice a king and rook ending anyway. So, and now there you go, that's a pretty simple checkmate. So lesson for me there, I mean, I got what, 2 points for winning this game, 2 rating points, but you know, but if I'd lost, I would have lost 14 points. And I think that very often when you're playing somebody weaker, if they've got their head on straight, if they've got their mind sorted out, and they decide that they are going to take every second that they've got, you can find yourself in trouble, I think, quite easily. Because particularly if that meets you thinking, oh, I'm going to just play a quick game, I'll just knock out a quick game, grab a little bit of rating points, and then carry on with my evening, right? But if you go in with that attitude, it's precisely the wrong way. You're never going to play your best chess if you think that you are that you deserve a quick win, because that's the way that you could fall on your face and embarrass yourself. Fortunately, in this instance, my opponent, being rated between 1,000 and 1,100, wasn't inclined to do that kind of depth of calculation that he could have done, because he could have seriously got a material advantage earlier on in the game, and that would have been egg on my face and a sore lesson. Fortunately, it worked out all right, but there you go. The dangers of playing much weaker players. Okay, I'll see you next time.